We're going back to the book of James again tonight, and chapter 3 is our passage for this evening, James chapter 3. And really it's a pretty familiar passage, or at least idea. We've already covered this to some extent, just as we've studied through James, but we're at another point, and this is 12 verses here that are all in this same line of thinking. And so tonight we want to talk to you about the tamed tongue. The tamed tongue. Actually, my Bible gives the heading as the unruly tongue, but I don't want to just leave it there. I want to focus a little bit on the taming of it. But James chapter 3 and verse number 1. My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths, that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also the ships, which though they be so great, and are driven of fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. Even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. For every kind of beasts, and of birds, and of serpents, and of things in the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind, but the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we God, and even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. Doth a fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter? Can the fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries, either a vine figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. And so what it's kind of summing up there at the end is that whole idea that they have to agree. If we are a Christian, our mouth ought to reflect that. If we are not a Christian, then obviously our speech is going to reflect that as well. And so tonight I want to focus on that issue of our speech one more time. Maybe we won't be totally done with it even then. But James spends quite a bit of time here in chapter 3 talking about the tongue. And so we're going to do the same this evening. I've read that there's a hill in the English over in England, apparently, in an English country churchyard. Apparently, the way they described it was a windswept hill in an English country churchyard stands a drab, gray slate tombstone. And the quaint stone has a curious epitaph there, and I think you maybe have to, even from what I could understand, you have to sort of get down pretty close and scrutinize it a little bit maybe to try to even read what it says there. But the words that are etched on its surface go like this. Beneath this stone, a lump of clay, lies Arabella Young, who on the 24th of May began to hold her tongue. Now, that may be a little bit cruel in one sense, but James almost seems to echo that grim view of the reality of somehow guarding our speech as we ought to, keeping from careless or even harmful speech. And he at least equates taming the tongue with spiritual victory. And the whole idea here is that if we are governed by God, our tongues will be governed by God as well. Our speech will be. But if you can't guard your tongue, then apparently you can't guard your life either. And so he even mentions here that those who could control the tongue, verse number 2, if any man offend not in word, the same as a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. And so if you can guard your speech, then it's likely the rest of your life is guarded as well. And this is not something that just sort of simply happens because we resolve to, just because I think I know I need to be careful here. I know that my tongue gets me in trouble, and so I'm gonna guard myself. It's not just that we can resolve to do this, but instead, this is something that requires the work of God in our hearts. And again, is the reason I've referred to the message today, this evening as taming, or the tamed tongue. It's not through our own efforts. It's not just that we can do this ourselves, but it's because God works in us and enables us to be controlled in our speech. Just notice the examples here that he uses to illustrate the impact of the tongue. There's several of them. At least he brings in a little bit. We don't find a whole lot here on the bits that are in the horses' mouths, but that's one of them. He indicates just even that small bit can turn that animal. But then he also refers to the small helm, or we might even refer to it as a rudder on the ship. And, huge ship, but relatively small in proportion to the rest of the ship is that rudder or that helm that just turns that ship in all sorts of different directions, as I think it refers to him as the governor here, or we might say the ship's captain, as he wants to turn that helm and turn the rudder, then that governs the direction of the ship as well. The final example that he gives there also is the fire. And we know how quickly just a small flame can turn into a raging inferno. And it may even not, it seems in my case anyway, I struggle with building a fire, but it seems like all they need is just a spark, the flint and steel and that kind of thing. They'll just strike that, and the sparks are there, and they can start fires even that way, from not even a full flame, but just a spark. Once it begins to burn, it can be extremely hard to get it under control. So I've had occasions before where, particularly, I was burning some boxes, but in various ways maybe, where you start the fire, you think everything will be okay. I think the wind is calm enough, and I don't think there'll be a problem. And you strike that, or actually in our case, maybe just click the fire starter, and you get that fire started in just a few moments. You may wonder, did I do the wrong thing? Especially in boxes. I don't think you're supposed to burn those, but at the time I didn't realize it, I guess, and I'd light the fire, and then you have these particles just going up into the sky, and you wonder, is it going to be all right? Am I going to be safe? This evening, we want to examine the issue of our speech. Want to just touch a little bit on how quickly those sparks can take off into a fire, and really they indicate our spiritual state. And am I really the man or woman that I say I am? Am I really the Christian I say I am? If I can't control my tongue, then apparently there's a problem. And of course, it not only is an indication of our danger, or our spiritual danger, spiritual state, and that can be actually in a good way as well. But many times we think of it in danger, but it also poses a danger to us spiritually as well, and not just spiritually, but even in our relationships with one another. So let's just look at a couple of aspects here this evening. First of all, let's touch on this issue of the speech as the indicator. The speech indicator. Maybe I could kind of compare what James is saying here to a weather vane. I'm not sure if it's real common around here. I can't remember if I've seen a lot of them, but I've seen a number of them on barns and things, and sometimes they have some sort of a fancy, whatever it may be, the etching or the outline or whatever of this. Maybe it's an animal or some other special object of significance, and so that weather vane is standing up there, and if it's doing right, if it's doing what's supposed to, then it'll be turning one way or another, depending on how the wind blows. And so you can kind of think about that. And obviously, the weather vane does not make the wind blow. It's not like the weather vane directs the wind, and this is the direction you have to be. But it simply is an indicator of which way the wind is blowing. And I know that people may prefer to kind of try to separate the evidence from the reality, or we might say the fruit from the root of the issue. And they'd like to say, well, you can't judge what I do. You can't try to say that I'm not a Christian like I say I am, or that I somehow am not doing well spiritually because of the way I talk. But in reality, our talk is an indicator of what's deep down inside. And that, I believe that's probably a part of the reason, at least, that James is saying here, that if you can control your tongue, it's not just that your tongue is surrendered to God, but that the rest of your soul is surrendered to Him, or your tongue wouldn't be able to be. And so, in a sense, we might say that the tongue is just, or our speech, our mouth, is just the indicator of what's going on deep down inside. Sort of the weather vane of our soul. Our speech can show, you might say, which way the wind is blowing in our soul. What I'm doing spiritually. Am I really staying close to God? Because pretty often, when we start struggling spiritually, our mouth is going to show it. And it may not be, and I'm not talking necessarily profanity or anything like that, but just maybe the backbiting, the criticism and various things of that sort. Maybe sometimes even harsh speech. And really, maybe I can just give you a quick little list here. This is not necessarily hard and fast. It's not just the rule that this has to be the case. But just a few I could give to you that, again, this is the indicator in our lives. And so if our speech is harsh, then it may indicate that deep down inside somewhere there's a temper problem. There's a wrath problem. And I have not surrendered that to God. God is not in full control of my emotions. And our harsh speech may be just the indicator of it. Maybe it's gossip that's the problem. Obviously, there are probably a number of reasons for gossip, but sometimes it could even be that it just shows that deep down inside there's jealousy or there's envy of someone. There's something that kind of roils in our spirit and we don't like that person. We have a hard time with them for whatever reason it may be. And it's revealing what's on the inside that I have a spiritual problem in my relationship with someone else. And so let me just share this with you. Let me just tell you about what I've heard. And gossip may point to jealousy and envy. Again, it could be a number of other things too, but I'm just giving you a few ideas here. Maybe it's backbiting. I think we had that in our passage this morning. And so as someone may be, nitpicking and backbiting and causing all sorts of stirring, even in a congregation or whatever. And sometimes that may even indicate, just one I thought of was bitterness. Maybe there's something that happened long ago, and so that bitterness still kind of churns inside, and so they start backbiting, they start fault finding, they start trying to cause stirrings in maybe the congregation or among neighbors or whatever it may be. Maybe it's even lies, just outright lies. And again, it's not just, obviously the Bible is very clear about not lying, and all liars will take part in the lake of fire. And so that's very, very serious. But even beyond that, it may go deeper, and that whole mindset or a focus. I don't know if you want to call it a focus, but at least a susceptibility to deception and deceiving people and trying to twist the words around so that nobody really knows for sure. Maybe it's even hypocrisy that is lurking down there, and so lies kind of put out a good show, but they're supposed to be, at least, hiding the hypocrisy of our heart. Who knows what it may be? That's just, I've given you a few examples here this evening, but I want us to think about this, that what we say, sometimes maybe even how we say it, is actually pointing back deep down inside. This is who I am, and my words convey the reality. Again, they're just some of the signs, but when we speak things that displease God, it's usually not just the words that are the problem, but it's the heart behind it. And again, I remind you there, verse number 2 is pretty clear that if our heart is wrong, then likely our speech will be wrong, but also vice versa. It works the other way too, that if we have good and kind and compassionate speech, it probably indicates a heart that is pleasing to God, a heart that loves God, loves other people, wants to do something to support and help. Our speech is an indicator of our spiritual condition. Not only that, but we want to move just a little bit further, and there's also the areas that speech actually is, you might call, the instigator of the problem. The speech instigator. James points out that the tongue is we've shared this a number of times, I suppose, but it's a pretty good test of our genuine heart state. But then he also deals with the problems that are brought about through our mouth, through our tongue, through the things we say. It's just such a little member. It shouldn't be any big problem, It's not like our arms, our legs, our head, but of course it's part of our head, but it's just a small member, and yet it can have such devastating impacts. Refers to it as how it can stir up a world of iniquity. And I may add even their hurt, because so often the tongue can just in a few moments do tremendous damage. Probably could get into a number of details tonight, but I don't think that's necessary. Obviously, we got to guard our tongue as well. But could I just say it this way? Many churches, and probably many individual Christians, I'm sure, I've heard of someone even since I've been here in this area, long ago, but how some harsh words, or maybe even, I don't know, maybe sometimes even trying to speak the truth, but just not in love. Whatever all it was, but churches have been destroyed, lives have been destroyed. Christians even that are they're trying to be Christians, they're trying to do what God wants them to do. They're anything that they understand or know, they're living for God, and yet a harsh word or some unkind statement just offends so deeply. And maybe that young Christian who didn't have their roots really down firmly and deep just yet is driven away. Sadly, speech sometimes, even from professing Christians, can be from the fires of hell. Souls can be hurt. Apologies can be given even eventually, but they can only go so far. I heard one example, I'm forgetting now if it was man or woman, but they spread a story about a particular man, I believe it was. And so the story goes far and wide, and then the instigator of the problem comes back and apologizes and said, I've done this, I spread this story about you or whatever, and asked for forgiveness. Well, obviously we have to forgive, but once it's gone out there, what can be done? The damage has been done. Oh, we have so much these days that people will put out things that they want said. They want the message out there, and then they'll backtrack, they'll apologize, but it's already done. The damage is done. In this particular case, I think the man said he forgave him, but he did just give him a little lesson. And it took a feather pillow with, the real feathers in it, and from, I think, maybe a second story window or something, just dumped them out. And said, now, if you would, just please go pick up all of those feathers that the wind has blown far and wide. And the message, of course, comes back pretty clearly. When our words go out, when we say something that is unkind or harsh or not thought through, maybe that wasn't the right way to say it. Maybe even some of the basic features of what I said was true and right. Maybe it was even needed. But if it just goes out carelessly, sometimes we can cause such damage. And apologies don't undo all the damage that's done, all the hurts that have been caused, all the young people that have been destroyed, all the homes that have been wrecked because of careless or unkind, unchristian, unguarded words. Let me just, for a moment, let's go back to verse number 8. And I want to just call your attention to two little phrases there. It says, but the tongue can no man tame. And then it says, of course, don't forget, it says no man can tame it. And I'm trying to remind us again, God can. But then he goes on and says, it is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. And so those two phrases, just real quickly, I just want to touch on those. What's meant by this? I don't know all the reasons that he worded it just this way, but here is what I want us to think about. The unruly evil is the first one, and it seems to indicate to me, you think about an unruly child. Sometimes maybe you think you have them disciplined. You think you have them trained. You think that surely they're going to behave this time. But if you don't watch them closely in the wrong situation, next thing you know, they're right back into their mischievous ways and causing a problem, and you're embarrassed and all those things. It's just in a moment that unruly child can get out of hand, say the wrong thing or whatever else. But in that analogy there, I think that sometimes the tongue can be that way. We think that we have it all just, I'm guarded now. I'm going to be careful what I say, and I'm not going to let that happen to me again. All those things. But again, it's an unruly evil. And in my mind, I'd like to maybe just say it this way. Without the help of the Holy Spirit, it won't behave. Trouble lurks around the corner. Next thing you know, suddenly something comes up and you speak harshly. You say something you're ashamed of, maybe even. Again, I'm not talking profanity here. We're talking to Christians. But basically, it comes down to sometimes saying things that we shouldn't say or in a way that we shouldn't say them. And trouble lurks around the corner. It is an unruly evil that you cannot just resolve to do better on. Oh, you can try. But we must have the help of God to tame our tongue. The second one that it mentions there is that it is full of deadly poison. Full of deadly poison. And I don't know all that's involved. Obviously, we've already mentioned a few things that can happen. But really, in a sense, we might say its potential is, I think, one of the really poisonous snakes. Maybe they're in Africa, is the black mamba. And I'm not sure the numbers. I should have maybe researched that a little bit to see just how many men they would say that it can kill. But it just sort of reminds us that our words can have devastating effects, and not just to one person, but to countless people. Sometimes, again, even churches may be destroyed by one person's speech. One person's tongue being used in gossip or stirring up stories, backbiting, criticism, all those things. And I've mentioned again, we just had covered some of this ground recently and in another part here of James. But I just would mention to you again this evening, some people that otherwise may match every aspect of Christian living to a T. I mean, appearances or participating in church activities. Obviously, if you get really down to the nitty-gritty of their lives, maybe there's sometimes you might have a question, but basically everything else may be all right. But that person may be that bit of deadly poison, just little by little, injecting that venom into the people around. And really, it is tragic, the damage that has been done. It's horrifying to even think about the judgment that will come unless that's confessed. But it's full of deadly poison. And souls are lost in eternity even this evening because of tongues injecting their poison into people's lives. Well, that's not a very pleasant picture. And I titled the message, The Tamed Tongue. A big part of that, I guess, is because we can have speech that pleases God, but the only way for that to happen is for us to let God tame it. We can't do it ourselves. It has to be a change from the inside, and then we want to say the right things. I understand. Sometimes we speak just quickly and we didn't mean anything by it. It's not that we're trying to say anything wrong, but it just in a moment, maybe we said the wrong thing. I've done that before, even as a pastor. I remember one situation where I was just visiting with a family, and we were kind of joking around about how the boy was sort of, maybe a little nixy sometimes or whatever, a little, he could be a handful maybe at times. And I just sort of joked along with him. But then I saw the boy on my way out, and he said, "I heard what you said." Oh, I wouldn't have hurt that boy for anything. But I knew I did. And I got right down there on my knees, and I don't remember if I necessarily put my arm around him, but I at least said, just right down by his face, I said, I am sorry. And I tried to really make it right then. Sometimes we do that. I didn't mean anything by it. It was just in fun, but it hurt him. And so sometimes that can happen. But I'm talking about a carnal speech, the work of the enemy working on the inside and trying to get us to say things that are inappropriate and unkind. I don't think we can tame our tongue without the work of God. But He can. He can change our hearts so that our speech from the inside out is holy and righteous. He changes our nature. He changes our attitudes. He changes our behavior so that our speech becomes pleasant. And it's an indication of a holy heart. And so tonight, I know this is familiar to us. We just really covered this issue of the tongue. But may God help us tonight to maybe check the indicators and then ask God to somehow cleanse the instigator of the problem and take out that every desire, or maybe it's not even a desire, that we can put our finger on, but just that very nature that would make us say the wrong thing. So God help us tonight. Do you have harsh words? Have you been telling things that don't need to be shared? Now the Bible tells us love covers the multitude of sins. And if His love is dwelling in our hearts, it's not something we should be sharing with other people. And so God help us to have a tamed tongue, not because we resolve to be tamed, but because we've given our hearts and minds, bodies, including our tongues, to God.